Be seated. We're going to wrap up this series, Dare to Dream, today. We've been in it for a little bit, so excited about that. But if you've been here with us for the last couple of months, over the last couple of months, we've been dreaming of the things that we hope that our congregation would be, things that we would embody, things that people could say is true of us, that we could say is true of us. And then if you kind of look at all the dreams in total, honestly, the dreams they're bold, they're ambitious, they're lofty, they're daring. It's why we said the series is Dare to Dream. And if you look at and I won't cover all of them, I think we can say that confidently that these dreams are indeed just that, daring, bold, lofty, and ambitious. We're dreaming that our congregation would embody a gospel like Hosea does to Gomer. Look back at that story in terms of what Hosea does for Gomer. We're dreaming that we would be a multi-generational, intergenerational church that's kind of undoing or putting right side back up all the age-old generational dynamics where the olders always have suppressed and oppressed the younger. We're talking about unity within diversity where all are welcomed as they are, but yet we're all one somehow within this Korean American context in some ways. We're passionately dreaming that people would go and be sent on missions, people who pray, people whose brokenness and hurt can be redeemed and healed in this place, so on and so forth. We did not hold back with these dreams at all, and so that's why I'm saying that they are certainly bold and lofty, ambitious, and daring. But as we wrap up this series, the question that kind of kept coming to mind as we're kind of drawing to the end of this is, how are we journeying at the end of all of this? How are we going to continue to journey going forward coming out of this series? How is it that we won't just make this a thing that we did and then we don't think about it again and just kind of go on to the next series coming up? And as I thought about that, I imagine the way that many of you have kind of journeyed throughout this series of dreams. I imagine a couple different contexts. I think some of you, maybe a few of you, have journeyed through it with excitement, and you've said, "Yeah, I'm here for it. Like I'm here with this, right? Like I want to." And you've been dreaming each step of the way and going, "Yeah, this is what I want our congregation to be. This is what I want our church to be. This is what I want to be." And you've been going through it step by step, dream by dream. I think maybe then more of you have done so with hesitation. This, you know what? Sounds really good, but is it really possible? Like I know that the gospel says that it is, but is it really possible here and now? And if you feel that way, most of you probably have said, okay, you know what, we'll wait and see. And then I think most of us, if we're being honest, have journeyed through this series with doubt. This idea where you're like, nah, you know what? I don't even know if that's really possible, to be honest with you. It's just a bit too lofty, it's just a little too high, and all we're gonna end up doing is getting our hopes up and then being more disappointed in the end. Let's not get caught up in the pipe dreams and just kind of settle down, take a chill pill. And then hopefully none of you, but maybe some of you will be like, whatever, I don't care, and just, kind of moved on. And I understand where all of this is, because this is kind of the problem with dreams in and of itself. Dreaming and hoping and all of those things. You see, with dreams, when you start to encounter dreams, you start to realize, well, first of all, dreams, often it's not about the dreams, it's about the dreamer. And what I mean by that is, some of us are dreamers because of our temperament, right? Some of us are just kind of optimistic. We are head in the clouds kind of people. We dream about everything. But some of us also may have dreamed one time, but then might have gotten burned. And so you don't dream anymore. So it's more so than the dream, it's your experience and how you've handled it. And so there's that component. But also, the issue with dreaming is because, we call them dreams for a reason, don't we? The ideas are usually not very much grounded in reality. People will tell us, hey, get your head out of the clouds and get your feet on the ground. Get a grip, stop dreaming, some people will say. But unfortunately for us, even with all of that, and we all know this, though on one hand they tell us that, on the other hand they'll tell us, be all that you can be, never stop dreaming, dream big, don't let anyone tell you what you can and cannot do. And so there's just a lot of confusion as to what in the world we do with all of this. How do we navigate and journey through all of this, right? And oftentimes I think as we do this in church, that can be the way that we handle it. Yeah, all this stuff is going on, but how do we actually go and do this? And I think the way that we can kind of navigate through this is to embody a posture that the New Testament teaches us that you may know of. It's this. Hopefully it works, please. No. Technical difficulties. Sorry, stream people. Why? Don't we love technology? It worked fine this morning. There we go. Yeah, we're back. This posture called already but not yet. And the idea is pretty simple. It's the idea that the kingdom of God has broken into the world. That's the already part. That's the truth. God's kingdom is here. And if that's true, it means that we can live and taste the fruit of God's kingdom right now, here now. But yet, the kingdom has not yet come fully. That's the not yet. Not all the way in. Scripture tells us that it's behind a veil of sorts, which means we can taste the fruit of the kingdom at times, but maybe not all the time, and also not quite as full as we would like to taste it. And so there's this tension that we live in. The gospel is always this tension. Already, but not yet. Yes, but no, kind of. And so here's what I propose today as we walk forward with these dreams in mind, to help us to continually dream, but to continually keep it real. And it's two things. Dream big, but dream of the glory of the cross. And I hope in this we'll have a practical way of walking forward out of this series, out of these doors, and continually dreaming for our congregation, and yet doing so in a way that's going to be helpful for us and not the other way around. Dream big, because we must. I think oftentimes what God finds is that our dreams are just too small, that we don't dream what God wants us to dream. And then secondly, because these dreams are not our dreams, but the church's dreams, that we would indeed, or God's dreams, that we would dream of the cross. Because I will say it again, but I'll say it now, dreaming of the cross is the boldest and most daring dream anyone can dream, period. And we'll unpack that in a little bit. So the story that I know, the passage that I know that does this best is the Transfiguration. If you've been here a little while, you know that this is one of my favorite passages. I love to preach it, and I just couldn't help myself but to preach it. So if you would have your Bibles, turn to Mark chapter 9, verses 2 to 13. We're going to read about the Transfiguration of Jesus Christ, and then we'll jump right into it. Mark chapter 9, verses 2 through 13. And in the back, if you could click forward for me while I read, I just don't do a good job of keeping my place, and then I'll take over after we're done. Mark chapter 9, verses 2 to 13. Let's read together, shall we? 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John and brought them up on a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his garments became radiant and exceedingly white, as no launder on earth had whitened them. Elijah appeared to them along with Moses, and they were talking with Jesus. Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 tabernacles, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." For he did not know what to answer, for they became terrified. Then a cloud formed, overshadowing them, and a voice came out of the cloud, "This is my beloved Son, listen to him." And all at once they looked around and saw no one with them anymore except Jesus alone. As they were coming down from the mountain, he gave them orders not to relate to anyone what they had seen until the Son of Man rose from the dead. They seized upon that statement, discussing with one another what rising from the dead meant. They asked him, saying, "Why is it that the scribes say that Elijah must come first?" And he said to them, "Elijah does come and restore all things, and yet how is it written of the Son of Man that he will suffer many things and be treated with contempt? But I say to you that Elijah has indeed come, and they did to him whatever they wished, just as is written of him." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Dreaming big, let's just jump right into it, the passage. The Transfiguration passage comes in 3 of the 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, okay, not in John. And in all 3 accounts, just before the Transfiguration, the same type of stuff happens, almost exactly, okay? And here's what happens right before the Transfiguration. First, you have a miracle. Jesus feeds the 4,000. And then Jesus asks the disciples after this, and he goes, "Hey, who do the people say that I am?" And then there's a famous passage where Peter, right, first and foremost, confesses as the first human being ever on earth to confess that Jesus is Christ. He goes, "You're the Christ." And then he gets, applause for it, right? And then, right after Peter confesses that Jesus is Christ, then Jesus begins to teach him about his death and resurrection, how he has to suffer. And Peter's having none of it, right? Because he's like, "You're the Christ, you're not going to do so." So then Peter has the guts to rebuke Jesus. And because he rebukes Jesus, it does not go well with him. This is when Jesus calls Peter, "Get behind me, Satan," right? You don't ever want to be called that by anyone, let alone Jesus. And then right after that, Jesus has this famous soliloquy that you may have heard of. He says, if anyone wants to follow me, they have to deny themselves, pick up the cross, and then follow me. And then he gives another famous quote that many of us know, "What does it profit a man to gain the world and let forfeit his soul?" So all those things are very connected. If you look at what happens right before the Transfiguration, there's a lot of ups and downs, highs and lows. I mean, can you imagine at one point, being before Jesus and him being like, good job, you finally figured out who I am, and then literally moments later being called Satan. It's contrast, up and down, this kind of a thing. Well, right after all of this, it's a bit of more the same. Higher highs and what I would call maybe lower lows in some ways. So then 6 days later, we're told, right after these events, Jesus takes Peter, James, and John up to the mountaintop. And then all of a sudden, Jesus is transfigured. This is a painting by a famous painter I can't remember the name of anymore. But the word transfiguration is from the Greek word where we get the English word metamorphosis. It's the idea that Jesus was transformed to something bigger, different, and newer. A glowing white figure, so white and glorious and bright that Mark describes it kind of funnily. He says, no dry cleaner could get him more white. In every single way, this story is supposed to remind Peter, James, and John, and every reader, and us as modern readers, of Moses and God on Mount Sinai. It is written that way. So we're supposed to think of that story, okay? And if you remember that story, here's what happens. Moses is on Mount Sinai. God comes down in a cloud, and then Moses says to God, hey, God, I want to see your glory. I want to see your face. I want to see your glory. I want to see what you're about. And then God goes, you can't, because if you did see my glory in full, you would die. So I got a different plan. How about you see over there, there's a little crevice in the mountain. Go stand over there. I'm going to cover you with my hand, and then I'm going to walk by, and then when it's safe, I'm going to take my hand away, and then you can see my backside, because that's how much you can see and live, right? Do we know the story? And so Moses sees just the backside of God, and then when he walks down the mountain, he's radiating, right, that glory so much that his face is shining. People are like, yo, you're really glowing today, literally. So what's happening here with Peter, James, and John, we're supposed to know without a shadow of a doubt when Jesus is transfigured, is they're seeing God's glory, but not a glimpse, but in full. And in the biggest surprise yet, they do not die, okay? And so Peter, James, and John, understandably, are scared. They're all out of sorts. Peter's world is just spinning. So then look at what he goes, Rabbi. And remember, he just confessed that Jesus was Christ. So he switches form. So Jesus goes from Christ to Rabbi because he doesn't know what's going on. Rabbi, teacher, it's good for us to be here. Let us make 3 tabernacles, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. Here's what he's really saying, my translation. He's going, this is good, ain't it? Like, this is good. But you know what would make it better? Tabernacles. One for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. And I can imagine he turns over to James and John and goes, because then we won't die. Here's what Peter's thinking. He knows, like every other good, faithful Jew, that no one can see God's glory and live. It's why in the Old Testament, when Moses comes down from Mount Sinai, the Israelites built tabernacles. And the priests would go into these tabernacles, and they would then see God's glory, and they would kind of navigate this, right? They had all these rituals. They would clean themselves, do all this stuff. The whole idea is that the tabernacles acted as like a layer of protection between God and human beings. Because God's glory and God's holiness and human beings' sin, they don't mix, okay? And so here's what Peter is really saying. He's going, Jesus, like, you look really cool, glorious and amazing. Like, don't get me wrong, you really do. But this ain't going to work. This is not safe for us. We need tabernacles because without it, it's not going to end well. We're going to die. Now, I hope you're seeing what's going on here. Here's Peter, James, and John, who are incredibly the most honored and privileged human beings as the first human beings ever to see and be part of God's full glory and live. And yet, they're not celebrating. They're not reveling. They're not going, oh, this is amazing. No, not at all. They are just flustered. They're just dumbfounded. They don't know what's going on. They cannot handle it. And so what they're trying to do with every bit of their might is to bring it down so they could just feel a little bit more comfortable. They're trying to bring it back down to earth because they don't feel safe. Familiarity and comfort. And this is interesting because I think this actually happens to us in life quite a bit. All of us since we were little, and even now, we've always been told to dream of greatness, and many of us, if not all of us, all want greatness. But yet, oftentimes, when given the opportunity for greatness, we'll find that it's often too much. And so we back down, we slink away, and then revert We settle. It's like in sports. You may want to talk a big game, right? And you may want the glory. But let's say you're a bench player. And then at the end of the game, in the championship game, the coach goes, hey, you, come. We're going to draw a play, and you're going to shoot the three, and you're going to win the game for us. How many of you actually say, all right, I'm in? Most of you go, oh, what? With me? I'm the worst player on the bench. The whole time you're like, hey, I want the last shot. You in the driveway, you're like 3, 2, 1, shoot it and make it. But then when it comes to the game, championship game, you freeze. No, I don't want that shot, coach. No. Give it to that guy. He's better. We do that, don't we? So this is what's happening here. The same guys who have been told to say, I want to be on your right and the left and all these things, when they're in this place, they don't know what to do and they fall right back. But thankfully, as God is, he's gracious and loving. Because as soon as Peter talks about all the tabernacles, God intervenes in a cloud and says, this is my beloved son, listen to him. In the very beginning of Mark in chapter 1, when Jesus is being baptized, God's voice comes out of the heavens and he says almost the exact same thing. You are my beloved son, he talks to Jesus, and in you I am well pleased. What God is doing in Mark 1 is this. Just before Jesus begins his ministry, he's saying, I love you, son. I got you. You're mine. Go and do your thing. I do this to my kids when they go play a football game or whatever. I love you. Don't worry about it. Go out and have fun. Right? You're reassuring them that what they're going to do is going to be okay. And in the end, we're trying to encourage and strengthen them. That's what Jesus was getting from God. And here, God is doing the same thing for Moses. He's saying, Moses, do not be afraid. And look, a cloud. Like you wanted, like in the Old Testament, like I used to do. But listen, your God is speaking to you now. But do not settle for what you know. Do not revert back to the same old story. Why? Because things are different now, you must see, Peter. Look at what you're looking at. Look at what you're seeing. Life is not the same anymore. My son is going to show you what life is supposed to be because I love you. And then all of a sudden we're told, like that, Moses, Elijah, gone, and it's just Jesus. All the focus on Jesus. Now here's what this means. I have to be the first one to admit to you that throughout this series, I wrote these dreams for the most part, right? But they're not always easy for me either. Some days you're like, this is not going to happen, or whatever. But we have to keep on dreaming. Why? Because the fact that Jesus came means our world is different. That's what Peter and John, James and John didn't get. They didn't recognize that everything had changed. That the reality Jesus talks about all the time is a reality that we can taste and live out more here and now. If you want to use that sports example, yeah, you can go in the game and maybe potentially hit that shot. That the realities are different now. That what we thought was totally unthinkable is actually not just possible, but it's here. Jesus is here with us, but we will revert and settle and go back to what's comfortable because we're scared, and I get it. But we must dream big. That's why dreaming big is so important for us. Because if we don't, we will just settle. It's what happens to all of us all the time. It's in our nature. So church, we must dream big continuously because it is important for us as we do. Because if we don't, then we will, I think, in many ways, miss out on what God is wanting for us here and now. Then second, dreaming of the glory of the cross. Well, as they're coming down from the mountain, Jesus tells them, hey, don't tell nobody what you just saw. It's a bit of a buzzkill, right? And then, on top of that, as soon as he tells them not to tell anyone, he goes, oh yeah, and let me teach you again. This, I'm going to have to suffer, and I'm going to have to die, and then I'm going to resurrect again. Now, if you remember from what happened earlier, as I told you, right after Peter confesses Jesus as Christ, Jesus teaches them about his crucifixion and his resurrection, right? Peter then tries to rebuke Jesus for it, doesn't go hot for him. And so here, they take a different approach. We're told that they seized upon that statement. That translation is not the best, I think. What it really means is they kept that statement real close inside, right? That's what God told them, and they're like, okay, they kept it to themselves. But in keeping it to themselves, I think Peter, James, and John couldn't help but wondering, what in the world is he talking about? Why does he keep talking about having to die and rising again? Like, what in the world is he talking about? That's what, right? Well, what does this mean? And so I think they kind of huddle, and they're like, Jesus is like walking in front of them down the mountain. He's like, what is he talking about? Why does he keep talking about being dead and rising from the dead? But Peter's curiosity in many ways, or their curiosity, gets the best of them because they can't just let the thing go. They need to figure out what's going on. But last time, Peter tried to rebuke Jesus. It didn't go well for him, and so they come up with a different strategy. In verse 11, he goes, why is it then that the scribes say that Elijah must come first? Now, what he's doing is this. He's pointing back to something that the prophet Malachi had said. And Malachi said that once Elijah appears before God, then it would signal that it's the great day of the Lord. And the great day of the Lord is the final day when God makes everything better. It's a big day, right? And so the disciples are kind of changing the subject real quick on God, on Jesus, which is they're trying to be sneaky, but Jesus ain't falling for it. They're saying, okay. I think I get it, Jesus. I got you. I'm here with you. That's why we just saw Elijah, right? Because you're trying to tell us that the day of the Lord is here, right? That God is going to make everything right again, right? That's what you're saying. Like, I get it. Oh, makes total sense, Jesus. Okay, cool. But Jesus shuts that down real quick. He goes, yes, but no. See, because what y'all keep forgetting is the Son of Man and the suffering and the dying and the resurrecting part. He says, Elijah did come. And they did to him whatever they wished, just as it was written. He's saying Elijah did come, and his coming is signaling God's coming, but you got it all wrong. It's not the way that you think it's going to be. Because we're not waiting for Elijah to come. He's already come. He said the prophecy of Elijah was fulfilled through John the Baptist, the guy who came and said, here's the Lamb who's taking away the sins of the world. He's the modern day Elijah. That prophecy was filled, and you know what happened to him? He got beheaded. They did to him whatever they wanted. He's like, that's why I keep trying to tell y'all that I got to suffer and I got to die again. The point is this, in through this entire section, what Jesus is trying to get them to see is that everything is about the cross and the resurrection. The miracles, the glory, him being Christ, transfiguration, everything is about the cross and the resurrection. The essence and the glory of who God is all about the cross. That's why we'll say the grandest dream anyone can dream is all about the cross. Now here's where we ought to go, wait, no, that doesn't make any sense. But sometimes as Christians, I think we go, okay, cool, the cross, it's great, right? I mean, we don't have one in here. I'm trying to put one over there. If anyone can help me with that, let me know. But the cross is like a thing, right, for us, and we think the cross is great, and it is. But sometimes we kind of, I think, get things a little twisted. You see, when we say that the grandest dream, most daring dream anyone can dream about the cross, it should make us feel uncomfortable, because here's why. See, dreams, right, dreams inherently in and of themselves, right, are all about glory, victory, and triumph. You dream of being the best. When you're little, if you're like my kids dreamed about being a firefighter. That's glorious and amazing to them, apparently. Now, my middle one, as you know, I've talked about him all the time, he wants to be an NFL football player. Go out there and do amazing NFL football player things. Cool. Dream. Glory. Victory. Whatever. Right? That's the dream. But the cross is not that dream. Why? Because Jesus dies on the cross. Like, yeah, I get it, he resurrects, but he still got to die first. Wouldn't you rather dream of not dying and then then you don't got to resurrect, you can just ascend, right? You can skip the death and the resurrection part and just go to ascension. That's not a modern day dream. No one wants to dream of dying and then resurrecting again. Again, skip it, I'd rather. So then why is this the thing? Why is this the thing that we're dreaming of? Why is the cross the thing? Well, let's go back to the beginning of the story because we need to kind of put it all together. In the Old Testament, as we've been talking about, there was no way to experience God's glory in any way, shape, or form without some sort of barrier, shelter, or protection. God was way too holy, and human beings are way too sinful. Holiness and sin, they don't mix, and not even like water and oil kind of a thing. Holiness and sin, you know what happens? Sin just dies. Okay? So holiness and sin can't mix. And so in the Old Testament, the relationship between us and God was always a mitigated relationship, aka there was a mediator between us, something that had to come step in between so that we wouldn't get destroyed by his holiness. And then all of a sudden, Jesus shows up. And then not only does he show up, he starts to do things, like he starts to teach in ways that only God would teach. It says he taught with an authority they hadn't seen before. That's pointing to God. And then he starts doing things that only God does, like calming the storm and doing these miracles that only God can do. And then to cap it all off, he then transfigures, emitting and showing God's full glory to human beings. But then there's a twist. He keeps the human beings alive. It's a weird way to put it, but in some ways, Jesus does something that God couldn't do. Are you following? God's full glory in the presence of humans means they would just die. But Jesus all of a sudden shows his full glory as God, and they don't die. And what it means in the long run is that in Jesus, with Jesus, things are totally different. They ain't never the same anymore. We can somehow be in God's glory, know it, experience it, receive it, and have it without dying. There's that song that we love. Oh my gosh, I forgot it again. It's by Phil Wickham. Oh my goodness, why? Joseph told me. Living Hope, there you go. And there's a line in the song where it says, the chasm between us, God has erased. There's always been this chasm, this big gap between God and us, and Jesus has made that chasm gone somehow. But Peter and us, we can't handle it. And I get it. And that's the state that we're in. That's why dreaming is difficult, because we don't know what to do with this truth. We can somehow live in God's glory and yet not die, but we don't know what to do. And this is understandable. For instance, all of us, especially when you're younger, and if you're an adult and you still have one, don't admit it to me, it might be embarrassing, but all of us have like a crush growing, celebrity crush. Everyone's got one. All the girls are like, oh my goodness, and the guys, oh my goodness, they all lit up. And you dream of meeting this person, right? So step one would be like going to a concert, or for me, going to MJ's game or whatever. Step two would be like meeting them in person. Oh my goodness. But what if in that situation, you didn't just get to meet that person, but that person wanted to have a meal with you, and mostly they wanted to come to your house and have dinner with you? How many of you say yes to that? No. It's honest. You've wanted the whole time, but why is that? Because you're like, wait. If so-and-so is coming over to my house, then they're going to see what kind of house I live in. They live in a multi-million-dollar mansion or whatever it is. They got all these things. They're going to see how I roll. No, I ain't about that. No, thank you. My house is too small. This is too that. I can't, no. I got to go pick this person at the airport. No, they're not riding in my car. No. We would actually not go. And then if some of us actually kind of showed them, we were like, you know what, forget the house, let's just go to a coffee shop or whatever, you would be nervous, you'd be sweating all over the place, you would say things you didn't want to say, you'd be bumbling your words, you would all this, and you wouldn't even know yourself, and you would think about it, and you'd be like, well, you know what, it might not even be a good idea, you know what, let's not even do this at all, because I don't want that person to know how not cool I am. Let's just be real. I'd rather pretend that person thinks I'm like cool or something. And the reason behind it is because we all know, all of us know, no one's like fronting too much. We all know that we have shortcomings and inadequacies, right? Everybody knows this. None of us are perfect. But the point is, in the presence of someone like that, our inadequacies are completely laid out. You can't hide them from nobody. I mean, I think I used to say my goal was to play ball with MJ, but the older I got, the more I rethought. Because then MJ would know how not good at basketball I am compared to him. And I don't want him to know that. I'd rather not. When you're a kid, you don't care, because it's just, just like you have these kid dreams and whatever. But the older you get, you don't. That's kind of how we are. Have you ever seen those movie clips or those YouTube clips where it's like a rapper or like a singer at a concert, and then randomly, they do this every once in a while, they'll call somebody and be like, hey, who wants to come and rap with me? Or who wants to come and sing this song with me? Have you seen those? And they go viral, like there's millions and millions of views, and then like one random person. Have you noticed? No one, the whole crowd, thousands of people don't bum rush the stage. Did you notice that? It takes a little while, and then one random person comes up. Everyone's like, oh my goodness, what is he doing? And everyone's like on pins and needles, like until they actually rap or sing or whatever. And then when they do, they crush it. Why? Because they're good and they know it. But that's not most of us. You would not go. You would, no. And in this day and age, we're like, that's going to be on YouTube. Everyone's going to, no, I'm not embarrassing myself. That's how we are with these things, if we're just being honest. It's why those videos are literally 1 in a million. It's that one person who had the guts to get up and crush it, and then the 45 million people who watch it on YouTube and go, ooh, that's kind of cool. This is kind of how we are when it comes to dreams, and particularly dreams of the cross and dreams of who God is. But then why is it that we're saying that the thing we got to do is to dream of the cross? Well, stay with me, because it's not as crazy as it sounds. Here's what the cross is, and we know this. The cross is the thing that erases the gap between us and God, right? It's the thing that allows us to know God and have a relationship with Him, for real. The cross is where Jesus once and for all washes us clean by His blood, taking the power of sin and death away by dying Himself and then resurrecting again. But even more than that, the cross is the place not only where does God wash away our sins, the cross is where God gives us, through Jesus, his righteousness. The theology term is to impute his perfection and righteousness. It's basically like putting on clothes. We take Jesus' perfection and then clothe ourselves in it so that when God sees us, he doesn't see us, he sees Jesus and his righteousness. And that's why he's cool with us. But beyond those theological, churchy things, do we know what it does for real in reality, what the cross does? The cross, in reality, what it's supposed to do for us is to take away that sinking feeling that we all have in our gut that we hate but don't ever like to admit, that feeling that I'm not good enough. I'm not this enough, I'm not that enough, I'm not fill in the blank enough with whatever you got. Most importantly, I'm not loved enough and I'm not secure enough. The cross is a place where Jesus gives us assurance and security that we are loved and approved, flat out, period. Take it to the bank. And it's the thing that we all want more than anything else if we're just really being honest. Where you don't have to worry that you're loved. You don't got to worry to prove yourself. Every student in here wants to prove themselves to whoever, their parents, their friends, whoever, but you don't got to do that with Jesus. This is what we're supposed to be dreaming of. Why? Because it's what the power of the cross is. That the horrors of the world that Jesus faced, he then takes it and turns it into a beauty that we can't even believe. Darkness replaced with light, horror replaced with beauty, wretched sin replaced with mercy and grace and love. It's where we can say to ourselves, I'm worthy of the King and God of the world to die for, and believe it. And more so than even that God delights in me. He's glad with me. This is the dream of the cross. That God, the perfect God, would sacrifice himself for imperfect human beings like me, that is real. C.S. Lewis, in his famous sermon called The Weight of Glory, I encourage you to Google it. C.S. Lewis, Weight of Glory, PDF, you'll find it. He gets at this idea quite well with these two famous quotes, one more famous than the other. But kind of in the middle of the sermon, he says this. Sorry for the quote is long, but I'll read it to you. He says this. He says, the promise of glory is the promise, almost incredible, dare impossible, I would add, but only possible by the work of Christ, that some of us, that any of us who really chooses shall actively survive the examination and shall find approval and shall please God. He's saying, at the end, we all know this, we go before God and he looks at us and he judges us and he says, okay, good or no good. He's saying the cross and the glory of it is actually the truth, that you can stand before God and then God will look at you and say, pass. Come in. But then beyond that, he said, shall please God. That is not God being like, okay, fine, you're good enough, just go ahead. No, something different. He says to please God, to be a real ingredient in the divine happiness, to be loved by God, not merely pitied, but delighted in as an artist delights in his work, or a father in a son. It seems impossible, a weight of burden, of glory, which our thoughts can hardly sustain, but so it is. God's going to look at us and say, I love you, come on in, and he's going to give you a hug and embrace you and say, this is where I've always wanted you to be. That's the reality of the gospel. It's a reality that doesn't exist in the world right now. To somehow think that this God would love me and delight in me. Again, I use students as an example, but there are many students in here who would just give anything for their parents to actually be pleased and approve of them. Some of us carry it on into our adulthoods, and then we transfer it onto our bosses or whoever else that we do. But this is the idea that God indeed would, that's our thing. Remember we talked about the favorite celebrity that you would meet? You replace that with God and our heads should explode. Because it's God. Our favorite celebrity, whoever it is, it's just a human being that God created, and yet it is so, and that's the dream that we dream of the cross, through the cross, because of the cross. But yet we don't. because it can be just too much for us. And that's what C.S. Lewis gets at earlier in the sermon. He says this, famous quote many of you might know, "Indeed, if we consider the blushing promises of reward and the staggering nature of the rewards promised in the Gospels, it would seem that our Lord finds our desires not too strong, but too weak." He's saying if we think about what God is offering us for real, then what he would see is that our dreams aren't too strong, they're just too weak. He says, we fool around. We are half-hearted creatures fooling about with drink and sex and ambition, and then add whatever else you fool around with. When infinite joy is offered to us, like an ignorant child who wants to go on making pies, mud pies in a slum, because we cannot imagine what is meant by the offer of a holiday at sea. We are far too easily pleased. He's saying God is offering us all these things, and yet we just keep messing around with things that are below us and beneath us. Because we can't dream big enough that this would be true, that God would be true. And again, I get it. In the world that we live in, it's really difficult because who actually gives you approval like that? Who says, I'm going to love you because I'm giving you the righteousness of a perfect person, and I'm going to, whoop. And so we mess around with all these things that won't satisfy us, all these things that we can mess around with and dream about that aren't ever going to do it for us. But the dream is that we can be God's delight, loved by him, and yet we find ourselves dreaming low and messing about with other things. I think this is a point where, as just being honest, we can say, yeah, that's actually how we do it. So then what do we do? How do we navigate? Because at times like this in the sermon, this is where we go, well, you gave us this big picture, but we don't really know what to do with it. Because I'm not seeing proof for the dreams oftentimes, and so it's hard to dream them. But if I give up on them, you're telling me that I'm dreaming too low, so on and so forth. How do I deal? Well, we're going to go back to C.S. Lewis's sermon, and we'll finish there, because he gives us an example that I think is really helpful. How we can actually dream of the cross and still dream big and understand what it is to live this going forward. C.S. Lewis is a great apologetic. He starts to take people's issues and then he kind of handles it, right? And so one of the issues that people raise is this. Well, if you're telling me to live for the reward of being loved by God, then aren't we just actually doing it for the reward and not for God himself, right? It's not motivated correctly. And we as Christians, we talk about that all the time. Like, we're doing it with the wrong intentions, right? That's the kind of idea. And so he goes, yes, but here's how we can understand this, okay? And not being selfish and just doing it for our sake. He's saying you can understand rewards in three different kind of ways in the human life. The first, he says, is basically a bad reward. And he uses the analogy, it's loving somebody for their money, right? It's a gold digger, bad. The good way is to love somebody for marriage, the good of companionship and love through and through, right? So bad and good, the way we approach rewards. But he says most of the time, actually, there's a third way that's much more complicated, and this is how actually life works most of the time. And he gives the example of a kid trying to learn Greek. And of course, none of us are learning Greek, so I'll just use the example of a kid learning either Korean, 한글학교, or violin, piano, or whatever. You can use your example whatever you want. All of us have gone through it, right? He says in the beginning, these kids, right, they're not learning Greek or piano or 한글학교 or whatever, Korean school, because they love it. Parents, don't get it twisted. They're only doing it because they don't want to get in trouble. They're only doing it because they want to get good grades and they want to make you happy, because if they don't make you happy, then they're going to get in trouble and they don't want any of that. So it's all wrongly motivated from the jump. They're not doing it because they like it. If you think that your kid studies most of the time because they like it, again, I'm sorry to break it to you, they're probably not. But they do it. And so it's not properly motivated. They're not doing it for the right reasons. But what he says is even though it's not for the right reasons at first, as they learn this skill, Greek or piano or Korean or whatever, in the long run, if they keep up with it long enough, they'll realize they've learned a skill that gives them new tools and new access to things that they never had before. And the idea of Greek, you get to read Greek literature, high literature, that is more beautiful than, I guess, English literature, in his opinion. Or with piano, you learn piano and all of a sudden you can make music and play. You can do things that you were never able to do before. And he says that skill, when you realize you have it, you'll never give it up no matter what anyone does. You'll keep it forever and ever and ever. But in the beginning, you won't do it because you like it. You just kind of do it because you need to. But as you start to experience and use it, then again, you'll keep it and you'll keep on building it. And this is how our relationship with God actually works. Living out the cross isn't always going to be easy. It isn't going to be things because we want to do it. Picking up our, denying ourselves, picking up our cross and following Jesus isn't something we do because we love it all the time, because it's so awesome. Let's be real. It's hard sacrificing for ourselves. It's hard, loving others. It's hard turning the other cheek. Whatever example you want to use, it's not easy. Even for Jesus, it wasn't easy. But when it wasn't, he trusted his God and he trusted his Father and said, whatever it is that you want, I trust you. For the joy set before him, endured the cross because it was worth it. And as we do, then we'll find that these dreams are true. We'll find that actually death is gone and we don't die when we die. That actually you can have joy in the midst of suffering. That there's peace even though the world is going crazy. That you can be unshakable though everything seems to be falling apart. In truth, what it means is that dreaming of the cross isn't always going to be attractive and desirable and things that you want. In truth, the other things of the world are going to be much more desirable. The attention of somebody at school that you like or somebody at your workplace or whatever is going to be more attractive to you than the attention of God. Let's just be real. But those things will never satisfy. They'll never give you what you want. It's never good enough. They always fail. But the cross never fail. And little by little, you're transformed day in, day out as you dream of the cross. And then you'll notice and see things that you never noticed before. And then your dreams will start to change and everything will be a little bit different. Full disclaimer, we have Fall Festival. I have people who've known me for a long time, they're here. I used to hate things like Fall Festival. It's a lot of work. What? We're not doing anything, it's just wasting money, blah. And then I started to see, but my biggest problem was I didn't want to do the work. I didn't want to sacrifice. But the more you start to do it, you start to realize there's a glory and a joy when you see the entire church come together, old and young, enjoying food and games and all this stuff. And then there's this joy that parents have in watching their little ones, and the little ones have in watching their games and playing their games and all these things. And then more so, the people who volunteer, there's a joy in serving in through it all, that you're a part of making this joy and goodness happen throughout the church. And then you start to see that it's worth it. It requires a lot of hard work, but it's worth it in the end. That not everything that we do in the church and not every dream that we dream is going to be always good, little by little at every single moment, but it's worth it. And that moment when you see someone else see the light of God's glory, that's worth it. In a moment where your life is going helter-skelter and you have peace that you never knew before because of Jesus, that's worth it. And so, church, we're asking you to dream and continue to do so. Keep on plugging away. Yeah, it's difficult. I get it. Show up. Trust in the Lord. Pray. There are days when you're going to feel like, no, I don't want to do the gospel. People are being mean to me. They're not being nice to me. Why should I be kind to them and do loving to them? Because Jesus does it for us. Someone may tell you, hey, you should love the way that Hosea loves Gomer. But I'm not getting the love that I'm supposed to get. And yes, but you did in Jesus. And his love transforms your life. His love gives you life after death, through death, death that is no longer death. And so, church, can I ask you, encourage you to dream of the cross? That in this gospel, in this faith, death brings life. That what Jesus asks of you is to deny yourself and to pick up your cross and follow him, and in doing so, we'll have life unlike any other. It will not always be easy, but it will be worth it. And then little by little, we'll grow. Little by little, we'll change. And then as you do, will you pray every day that this would be true? So as we finish, I'm going to give you an opportunity just to pray. I don't know where you're at with all of this. Some of you, again, might be the gung-ho. Yeah, let's do it. I'm down. Let's go. Others of you are like, yeah, okay, maybe, but I don't know. Some of you are like, nah, that's not actually, no, that ain't it. Like, good for you, Pastor Pete, but that ain't it. And some of you maybe are like, whatever. But wherever you're at, can you ask and go before God and say, would you help me to dream of this cross? The cross would be the thing that I want most, and that it would transform my life to live a way that I know is best. And if you don't know it's best, then ask God to reveal it to you. If there's anyone in here, and for those of you who are in the I'm ready for this dream, I've been dreaming it the whole time, let's go, then will you pray? Because I'm sure that there are some people in here who do not know the joy of the cross and what it does, who do not have tasted of this approval and this glory and this goodness that Jesus gives to us. And would you pray for that? Because that's what we need. And that's what will change us. And so take a moment, church. I hope you're encouraged in this place, welcome and free to be who you want to be and who you need to be. For I pray that the gospel and the cross and the glory of it will be received in your heart to the Holy Spirit, and in so transform your life. And that we would then be transformed to the glory of his kingdom and to be the bride and the body of Christ as we're designed to be. So take some time to pray, and the prayer team will join us and then lead us in song.